Welcome, Visions community. We're excited to be here in our second family learning community session of the year. If you missed our last session, we went over some quick start guides as well as instruction presented a little bit on the standards. If you missed it, you're welcome to click on the watch now so you can catch a recap of that session. Today, we're going to be looking at assessments and responding to data. If you're interested in our future sessions, they're all listed here for the year. So what are family learning communities? It's a year-long group coaching opportunity for family partners to learn more about best practices for curriculum and instruction at Visions. The topics are focused on areas of need for student and family impact in response to feedback that we got in our LCAP surveys.
In this session, we talked about how assessments inform all of our critical questions, but we really focused in on how we measure what students have learned based on what we hoped that they would learn and know how to do. We talked about how there are different types of assessments. Summative assessments are assessments of learning, and formative assessments are assessments for learning. We also shared about what these assessment types look like across all of our grade levels, TK through 12th grade at Visions.
So what does our curriculum look like? This captures a little bit of an overview of what a unit of study would look like in a typical course. So each course, students are presented with information, and then they're given opportunities to practice that information, and then they're given some type of formative assessment where they're able to get some feedback on their learning and where they're at so far. That cycle repeats a few times until finally you reach the summative assessment, and that's where students demonstrate mastery of what they've learned throughout the unit. So, what is the difference between formative and summative assessments? I like to think of formative assessments as like a track, and you have checkpoints along the way. Formative assessments are both those formal and informal processes during instruction that teachers and students use to gather evidence for the purpose of improving teaching and learning. Summative assessment is that final destination. That's the evidence that students have learned. So another type of analogy that I like is my chef analogy. So think of a formative assessment as when the chef tastes the soup. Once that chef tastes it, they can make determinations. Does the soup need a little bit more salt? Does it need a little bit more chili powder? What does it need, right? They can still make those decisions to make it better. The summative assessment is like when the guest tastes the soup. Can't add any more. It's done. What do some of these examples look like in your student's curriculum? Depending on what course they're in and what grade they're in, a formative assessment could look like exit tickets, checkpoints, practice hits, tower of power, learning gates. The summative assessments might look like module assessments, mastery assessments, performance tasks, or some end of unit assessments.
During the session, we talked about what these assessment types look like in practice. For example, you might see a summative assessment that comes in the form of an end or mid-unit assessment. But we also talked about what it might look like to assess formatively through questions like, can you say more about that?
In 7 and 12, formative assessments might look like practice its, show its, the checkpoints, or the assess its.
Welcome to the instruction portion of our family learning community. My name's Rebecca, and I'm joined by a few members of our team today. Let's hold on to our knowledge of assessments that we just learned and think of how this relates to student data. If you joined us in the live session, we discussed with families what they knew about student data. Student data is any information gathered about a student's learning and progress. It's how we figure out what's going well, where a little support might be needed, and what the next steps should be. This can include things like practice work, assessments, teacher observations, and even the conversations we have with students about their learning. I'm going to hand it over to Ashley so we can learn more about data.
Thank you, Rebecca. Once we discussed what student data is and how it may show up, I asked participants, what are some examples of student data you are currently using? Some examples were iReady data chats with their CT, asking their student to retell facts from a story they read, or even using the checkpoints in Lincoln Learning. And it just sounded like data is just all around us. Now, I will pass the mic off to Montoya, who will continue to expand on our shared knowledge around student data.
Thank you, Ashley. And just like Ashley mentioned, data is all around us. So we have this guide here to help us build some shared knowledge about student data together. So inside this guide, you'll find that definition that Rebecca mentioned. And then below that, you'll find a few examples here that Ashley also mentioned. And to go a little bit further, there are some examples here of formative data, summative data, formal and informal data. And if you'd like to dive just a little bit deeper into data to extend your learning, we have some additional resources available for you here down at the bottom. And next, I'm going to pass it to Alejandro, who will tell us about the family breakout groups.
Thank you, Montoya. Yeah, in our family breakout rooms, we discuss the second critical question, which is how do we know our students have learned what they needed to learn? And then some of our families had a few responses. So here are some of the responses. The first one is asking students to answer the who, what, why, where, and how on the text that they have just read. Also using some informal data with real-world applications such as baking, so they can ensure that they understand how to use fractions, or even getting even higher levels with asking clarifying questions that have students refer back to the text to pull out specific details that support their topic sentence. Now, these are just a few responses that we've gotten from our family partners.
Thank you for joining us for this brief recap. You can join us on November 4th at 2 p.m. for our next Family Learning Community session, where we'll be discussing pacing and planning as well as how to scaffold.